In the fall of 2022, Dassel-Cokato High School opened for its 50th year. How it all got started is a collection of very interesting stories. Both the Cokato and Dassel school buildings had students coming from the country schools if they wanted a high school education. By 1967, the State Department of Education required country schools to align themselves with a high school. This, along with the growing population of both Cokato and Dassel, led to overcrowding in the schools, to the point where Cokato had to add portable classrooms and send some students to the Stockholm Country School to deal with the huge numbers of students enrolling in the building.
My class, there was 63 that we graduated, or 65, somewhere in there. So smaller, of course, than what we realize today. So that's a different dynamic. So everybody was pretty much involved in everything. If you were going to have a football team, all the boys, or most of the boys, needed to go out for football then. Or if you were, and we were also in the choir, we were also part of the play, and those things were going to happen. Most of your class had to participate, or there wasn't going to be enough people doing it. So it was kind of nice when the country kids showed up, because it added that many more students to those activities.
Dassel High School, the Vikings, had their first graduating class in 1908. Dassel High School was a collection of buildings, including the 1886 yellow brick school building and the 1912 red brick multi-story building.
Your freshman year, you were on ground floor. And each successive year, you just kept going higher up in the school as far as where your lockers were and where your class was. It was an old building then, in 72. I mean, but they'd done renovations. The gym was relatively, I don't know when they did the gym, but it was, a nice basketball court, and the theater area was cool. I mean, it was quaint. All that history was built right into it. It was just a good place to go to school. Nice people, nice kids.
Cokato High School, the Cardinals, their first graduating class was 1904. Cokato High School was a collection of the 1902 brick building along with the 1927 auditorium and library addition.
There's a reason they built a new school.
Yes.
It was old. I know going up the steps to the big study hall, they were, they seemed like they're 20 feet wide, but I'm sure they weren't. Every step was creaky and they were wore out. My sisters went there and she graduated 10 years before I did. It's an old school, or was an old school.
The choir room was in the basement, and I'm talking in the basement. There were no outside windows. There was, it was
a hole.
It was a hole.
Yeah, but the acoustics were great.
In the old part, there was a big study hall. It was on second floor, and the windows were pretty loose, and things were pretty worn out. Well, if everybody in their desk would shake their legs like this, you'd get the whole floor to shake and bounce, and it would get the windows to rattle. And I don't know who started it, who instigated it, but everybody in the study hall, of course, would do it.
The Dassel Vikings and the Cokato Cardinals were great rivals in all sports, especially football, basketball, and baseball.
Because we're neighboring towns to Dassel, and we knew some of the kids here, of course, so that made it an intense rivalry.
The merging of the two school districts was proposed in October of 1968. At the time, Dassel had 587 K-12 students, and Cokato had 848 students.
My name is Bob Ness. I came to Cokato as school superintendent in the summer of 1967, which is about 54 years ago. And we began the conversations of needing to build, where to build, how to build, what's the vision for the future. And ultimately, Cokato had an incredible increase in enrollment. Correspondingly, the legislation was passed that all township schools had to be connected to a secondary or a high school. So there was that part, and at the time of that time, there were 8 operating schools in the area between Dassel and Cokato. We consulted with the Department of Education, and their first message was, talk to your neighbors. So we talked to Dassel, and we talked to Howard Lake, and fortunately Howard Lake said no, and they were not interested. Dassel and Cokato have very similarities in Scandinavians and basic values and whatever. So that was pretty much a beginning of the conversation, and that happened with Howard Hess from Cokato and Elmer Berg from Dassel, who was some people remember, electrician, and also with Home Brothers, the big hardware store here in Dassel. And ultimately, Howard and Elmer sat on the back steps of his house and talked about the possibility of the future.
One of the challenges each school faced was that they had no room to expand. They were landlocked. And the State Department of Education was starting to require at least 40 acres for a high school.
Because they told us we needed a minimum of 10 acres, we had to get a different site. So that was all part of the initial conversation. Well, then when we met with the department, they said you have to have 40 acres. So think about the site now where the new DC High School is, and all the additions to that site, and the middle school, and the pack of the auditorium, and the music and the band program, plus the fields. That 40 acres is pretty well consumed, and then some. So the vision there by the department in terms of guiding people to think, well, we just need this, yeah, it really made a difference. So that was all part of some of the consideration.
By February 1969, a vote was taken, and both school districts and communities voted yes, there was a need to merge. Even though the merge passed, there was still a lot of discussion about the pros and cons of how this would actually work to bring the two different school districts together.
It was somewhat controversial and was first getting talked about. For the most part, I didn't think about it too much because I wasn't going to be going to Dassel-Cokato. I recall there was talk, like with football games, basketball games, whatever, about this being the last time that Dassel and Cokato would be playing each other as competitors. A lot of talk about how this was really going to work when people who have been competitors all their life, and now they were going to be on the same teams.
And people were concerned that eventually the elementary schools would close, and they didn't want that. They liked the idea that each town had their own schools.
Parents were talking about wondering if they should consolidate. Should they not? How is it going to work? Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? But not a whole lot of negative that I remember way back then. And then we were told that we were going to be the first class. And so that was kind of exciting, scary, but exciting too.
With the official merge of the two school districts, a new school board was elected with representatives from Dassel and Cokato, and there became a cooperative sharing of classroom and educational opportunities between the two schools.
I thought they framed it very well. I remember that they talked about how this is going to happen in the future. I mean, because they combined a couple years before anything started happening. And I think we felt very progressive because there weren't too many combined schools at that time.
And some classes were in Cokato. If it was a language class, whether Spanish or whatever, some kids from Dassel would come here. Some kids from Cokato would go to Dassel for the teaching. If the teacher wasn't here, they'd be there, and yeah, it worked out okay.
4 of us from Dassel every day got on a van and they hauled us over to Cokato. We had our advanced math class in Cokato. And so I actually did have classes with Cokato kids. And I think we were like the only kids in this building that did that. And it was interesting. It was fun. We got to go over see some of the kids, and then we had Norm Quanbeck to teach us, which was a fun experience.
The process of building the new high school started with the selection of an architect, and the site of 60 acres was selected partway between Cokato and Dassel.
I remember that we talked about the fact that it was closer to Cokato than Dassel. That got brought up quite a bit.
The building proposed was a modern one-level high school using high-quality, long-lasting materials while still being fiscally responsible.
When we were designing the school, and the architect engaged the teachers in what happened. So if you want to just look at how the school was laid out, that's another really important thing. We had the library and the media in the center of the high school, and we're surrounded by classrooms and science and labs. And then we had the commons for lunch and for a small theater and whatever. And then we had the band and the choir and the gym and all those shop away from the academic side, which kind of made just an awful lot of sense. And then we had access to the pool from the outside, as we did to that end of the building. And then our fields and whatever were, on the east side of the building there. But just that concept of having natural light, have the academics separate, and with the noisy areas, if you will, separate from that, the phy ed and all those kinds of things. So yeah, those were kind of critical in the planning, but we had staff involved in terms of what you wanted to see, and so the architects laid it out, and they met with each department, and we went through the science and had everyone was still pretty conservative back there, and we were trying to maximize what we could do with the money that we had available. So that design process was still in process while we're trying to determine what the costs are, plus what would be supported in a referendum.
One of the main concerns about the school bond was how it would affect property taxes. This led to the May 1970 bond being defeated. The school board reviewed the results, made some changes to the plans, and with increased communication, the September 70 bond vote passed. As the building was being built, a variety of details needed to be worked out. School name and nickname, combining equipment that could be used, and the integrating of staff.
There was some politicking going on in there because now you've got two superintendents, you've got two principals, you've got two head football coaches, and that probably was more somewhat of a concern as who's going to go where, then I think the classroom stuff was still going to take place. And so I think those were some of the issues that maybe the staff would have been talking about, along with being excited about going into a new facility.
So the board actually voted to flip a coin. So Elmer Berg, who was in combat in World War II, had a silver dollar that he carried in his wallet. And that's on the display case out at the high school even now. But he had that, and that was the coin that was used then to flip.
I was on the student council, and the two student councils were charged with coming up with the name of the mascot. And so we put out suggestion boxes in both schools, and then one day after school, two councils got together in the classroom and opened up the boxes and went through the dozens and dozens of suggestions we had. It was, given the name DC, that had been decided at that point. Because of that DC, there were tons of names suggested that had to do with electricity, current and volts, and of course the chargers, which ended up getting altimeters. And we wrote all the names on a blackboard. There was suggestions all the way from Aardvark down to Zephyr. There were dozens of everything in between. And so I don't remember exactly how we winnowed it down, but we did. I think we went through and asked if anybody thought this one should stay and started crossing them off the list. And if I remember right, we ended up with 3 that we had the student body vote on.
In the spring of 1972, the final Cokato High School graduating class was 70 students. The final Dassel High School graduating class of 1972 had 40 students. On September 5th, 1972, brand new junior-senior high school was ready for its first day of students. There were 1,700 students enrolled and 130 employees.
And I really didn't know anybody from Cokato, so it was a whole new experience when they bring us together. But it seemed like we melted together really well, if that's how you can say it. No, nothing bad. We melted, we kind of combined really well, I felt, and the different things that we did and the opportunities. And there was a lot of opportunities for us.
Coach Dick Verdeen, he became the head basketball player, coach rather, and he had told me, he said that he was told by, let's say, powers to be, that make sure that the balance of starters is always 3 and 2, regardless as to could have been 5 and 0, whatever. But and now it doesn't make any difference. But at that time, it was kind of important. Nobody wanted to get shortchanged, so to speak. Football's a little easier. You got 11 guys, you got special teams, and it just blends in. But basketball I remember, was a little more different.
The best thing that ever happened was the football team. That year, put the Dassel guys out there, the Cokato guys out there, and I can still see people up there counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids from Dassel out there, and they're getting more Cokato kids on the field than Dassel kids, and then then as the season went along, they quit counting. We kept winning, didn't care, they're doing fine. And so by the end of the season, they were all, everything was fine. We went to the state tournament, we lost that one final game.
Yeah.
And it was the best thing that ever happened to school. The kids got to know each other real well, and they weren't competing anymore, and they were all part of the same team, and that was really good.
When we've had reunions, there's still a Cokato table and a Dassel table and a Cokato table, because we only had 9 months with these people.
Right.
And I mean, over the years, there have been people who have approached me and said, "You're Doreen Brandel, we graduated together," and I didn't have any idea who they were. If you didn't happen to have a class with them,
Right.
you didn't necessarily know them. And that was so beyond the realm from when we were just Cokato, and there were only 50 in our class or whatever it was. So it was quite different.
In October of 1972, an open house was held for the public with students as tour guides. Celebrations included a dedication ceremony and, of course, refreshments. On June 4th, 1973, 136 students were the first graduating class from the new Dassel-Cokato High School.
Because forever we're going to be able to say we were the first graduating class from the high school.
I have taught here at Dassel-Cokato for now 29 years, but I also was a student here from grades K through 12. I actually was the only one of my siblings who actually went to kindergarten, because the rest of my siblings all were a part of the country school system. So I was the only one that actually went to kindergarten and spent all my years at Dassel-Cokato. And I graduated in 1989. Our class had 2 claims to fame. We were the first class that had Sunday graduation. And our class was also, as a juniors, we were the first class to have prom party instilled when it was our turn for junior class prom.
I have been at Dassel-Cokato for a long time. Graduated from here in 1983, and I've been the AD for the last 19 years and taught previously and coached previously to that. So have a lot of different experiences here at Dassel-Cokato. A couple of coaches that made a big difference in my life included Mr. Hoyne and Mr. Sanborn. Mr. Hoyne was my baseball coach, and Mr. Sanborn was my basketball coach. And they had a very large impact on me beyond sports. They were people that I modeled a lot of who I am after those couple of gentlemen.
DC teachers have a huge impact on my life. I suppose the reason I am a teacher is because of some of my former teachers, Miss Remy and Miss Trisco in 6th grade especially, and so now teaching back in 6th grade is really awesome. And a lot of my high school teachers, I mean, I'm one of those people that can rattle off all my teachers from kindergarten through 12th grade, starting with Mrs. Rosenquist at Dassel Elementary, in a room that is not even a classroom anymore. So teachers are very important to me, and some even came to our high school graduation, or our first reunion. Our 20-year reunion was the first one we had, so that was pretty special.
Some of my favorite teachers that come to mind from elementary school would be my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Allen, and my 2nd grade teacher, Mrs. Ganser. Going into middle school, my favorite teacher from middle school would be Beth Remy. She was my 6th grade teacher, and then she was my volleyball coach, and I then became, kept in touch with her outside of school. I was her nanny for a year, and then she helped me get my teaching job. Another teacher that comes to mind would be Mr. Peterson. I was fortunate enough to have him in middle school and in high school. And then some high school teachers that I had that I absolutely loved would be Mrs. Marco. And yeah, those are some teachers that impacted me here at Dassel-Cokato.
When I graduated from DC, I didn't really know that I would be back in the district again, but now that I am, I feel like my heart is here. I loved growing up here, loved all my teachers and my experiences. And moving forward, having a family of my own, I'm very trusting of our teachers and our community to raise my kids alongside my wife and I, to make them be the best they can. So I guess DC has always been home for me and probably always will be home for me.
I chose to stay at Dassel-Cokato because this is home, and it's been home for all of my 50 years. But it's also been the home of my siblings. It's been the home of now my children. And I felt so honored when my kids came through the ranks here. And it was such a pleasure to watch them grow and watch them interact and be in the same building where I was and my husband. And it's just been fun to see how things have changed over time. And it's been absolutely a joy to be here for as long as I have.
I stayed at Dassel-Cokato, or came back to Dassel-Cokato, because I love the community, I love the small town environment. I actually went to Arizona and taught my first 4 years out of college, and friends and family in the small town environment drew me home. So I'm so happy to be here. And we actually lived in St. Cloud when we first got married, and I commuted for 10 years or something like that, and we moved back to Dassel so that my son, who is in 1st grade at Dassel, could go to DC for kindergarten. So very important to me.
Some of my favorite school events from elementary school would be Gummy Bear Day at Dassel Elementary. It was so fun. We got gummy bears, and that was a really fun track and field day. In middle school, I really enjoyed going to Long Lake in 6th grade, and then we were fortunate enough to have activity day. And then in the high school, I think I just remember the Pep Fest. We had a really big student crowd at the volleyball games that liked to dress up, and just some of those fun dress up days in high school.